Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today my guest is Abie Horrocks, well-known FAR environment researcher. And we're going to talk today about a report that Abie has just been pulling together as part of a much wider economic report that the Otago Regional Council have, commissioned to look at the impact that environmental actions on freshwater could potentially have on rural businesses in Southland. So
Otago.
Otago,
Yeah.
Sorry, Otago. So let's talk, first of all, about the actual context of you being involved in this and how it came about and what they're trying to achieve.
Yes. So right now, all regions in New Zealand, all the regional councils in New Zealand are thinking about how to develop an approach to implement the freshwater national policy statement that was updated last year. And Otago, ORC, Otago Regional Council, will be notifying their plan, their land water regional plan this year. So it's a busy time for them. It's implementing the national policy statement, but also the national environment standards. And there's a suite of other regulations around stock exclusion and water takes, and the certified freshwater farm plan fits into that as well. So FAR have been involved in this economic industry advisory group, which was tasked with really trying to provide ORC with all that background information to help them support them make those decisions, thinking about how the different sectors are integrated, the degrees of complexity, all those moving parts, if you like, around the different sectors that will influence their decision making, and really focusing on the economics of it in terms of potential impact to the farm businesses.
Yeah. So obviously we were specifically involved in the arable sector, and there is an arable chapter in this report, and there'll presumably be other sectors that have their specific chapters. So tell us about specifically what you were doing in the arable report. I mean, what were the activities that you did and what were the outcomes?
Okay, that's a big question.
I know.
So first of all, I'll say that it's just so fantastic that ORC are supporting this engagement with farmers and industry at this stage of the process, because we want to be having these conversations prior to the plans being notified, not afterwards. And without a really good understanding of the degree of complexity and what have you within these systems, then it's really hard to front foot the potential unintended consequences that regulation can generate. So this is a really positive step. There's a lot going on in that process for them to sort through, but that's just such a great start. And in terms of the question about what we're doing here, we started off working with some of the arable farm performance data, which was really fantastic to be able to paint a picture of what arable looks like in Otago for the council. This is around benchmarking financial and environmental performance on 16 farms in Otago. And an important thing that came out of that is the complexities and the degree of diversity, even though it can set some sectors or businesses up to unintended consequences, is also the strength, if you like, in terms of how to enable farmers to find solutions to the environmental, issues that the region is up against. So it's, on the one hand, a potential pitfall, but it's also a potential strength. So trying to make sure that all those different bits and moving parts are made really clear for the council has been a really big part of this.
So you were working with some case study farms?
Yes.
So just talk us through what you did with those farms.
Okay, so we had the 16 arable farm performance farms, and then we chose 4 case studies to run scenarios on. And there's no such thing as a typical arable farm, as we all know. But so trying to choose 4 farms that were going to be representative was certainly challenging. But we wanted to make sure that we had really good regional spreads around cropping in Otago, and to capture that the different extent of integration with livestock, because Otago is unique, a bit like Southland in that respect, with the degree of mixed systems in the region, whether that be wintering or finishing or breeding stock as well as, or a mixture. So we wanted to capture that because that has big implications for how regulation can land economically on a farm, and also irrigation and dryland systems. So we chose these 4 farms. McFarlane Rural Business got on board to do the modelling for us, and there were 2 stages to their modelling. The first was, well, what is it going to cost these businesses to bring it up to current regulation that's operative now? What does that look like for profit? And then the second part was around, well, let's look at a bunch of scenarios that around some hypothetical regulations, and what would that look like for the business? So we had to think really hard about, well, what scenarios are we going to run there? And really what we're chasing is the sort of scenarios that are going to frame the conversations that we want to be having around unintended consequences, in particular for the farm business, so that the council can be as aware as possible about what some of them might look like.
Yeah. So when you're talking about, sort of like the scenarios, you presumably made an assumption that there was certain regulations that were going to be implemented around stock exclusion or winter grazing or whatever.
This is where it got a bit tricky. The first part of the modelling was easy. It's like, we know what's operative, what's it going to cost to bring them up to speed with current regulation. And for those 4 case study farms, the impact on profits ranged from 2 to 14% reduction. And basically what the main reasons were around cost of fencing, actual cost of compliance, and also having potentially less stock on farm, and with some big drivers around profit reduction. So that part was easy. The second part was just thinking through what are some of the potential regulations that might be up for consideration, and we weren't told what to do. We there was a lot of discussion, and then so we focused on 4 scenarios, which gave a range of results, which are in the report. I can touch on some of them here, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about those results, because I think it's going to be really interesting to see the range of impact that the scenarios of sort of thrown out.
Okay, so we looked at a nitrogen scenario on one of the case study farms that was already making really, really efficient decisions around their fertilizer use. So with soil testing, and they have variable rate capabilities. So we looked at a scenario to say, well, at what point, how much flex is there in the system with a farm already operating really efficiently with their end use has to reduce nitrogen rates regardless. And in this particular case study, it was around an 8% reduction in nitrogen fertilizer rates for the crops on that farm to no longer be worthwhile growing in terms of the yield reductions and the hitting that break-even point. And we looked at a scenario where we said, well, what would happen if there was a withholding period with when nitrogen can be applied, say, between March and the end of September. And perhaps not surprisingly, there was a really strong effect on the spring crops. It didn't take any reduction in the rate for those spring crops, to just be unviable because of how important that September application of fertilizer is. And then so this opens the way for that conversation via the report to say, well, why is it important that we get really good September spring growth for those spring crops to maximise on soil radiation, in terms of competing with weeds, in terms of just getting optimum yields, but also thinking about ground cover, like some unintended consequences were able to be discussed around. If you don't get that spring growth, you've got bare soil for longer. There's implications with runoff and sediment loads if you have runoff events. There's also a very perverse outcome that could come come out of this if farmers go, well, I can't apply it in September, so I better front load and put it on when I'm allowed to back in February, March, and the hope that there'll still be some there to get that spring, really crucial spring growth. And then obviously the winter leaching risks go up, and there's all sorts of consequences of that. So it's just having discussions around those sorts of things. The report really goes into a lot of detail around, well, what does a fixed approach look like compared to a flexible approach when it comes to thinking about winter grazing, setbacks, managing those critical source areas. And, very subjective, and every farm will be different, but we just tried to cost up, well, if we had those blanket rules and a fixed approach, what is that going to cost a business compared to a flexible approach, which hinges on doing a really robust risk assessment and identifying what the risks are for your particular farm, what the right mitigation and the right actions are so that you get the best environmental performance, and making sure that's really solid, and then how that might, and costing that up with a number of scenarios. So for the setback example, it was very expensive in this particular farm to do the fixed approach with quite big setback distances depending on slope, and it came out as 11% reduction in EBIT, and compared to the flexible approach, which is more like 4%. And of course, it's going to vary on farm to farm, but a really important take-home message from all this work is really that we want to make sure that we can get the right mitigations for the right risk, because the worst case scenario is where you're spending a lot of money to do something that's not even giving you the environmental outcome that you want. So as much as we can, we want to be on the same page with that, because everybody obviously wants to improve that environmental performance and how we go about it. There's good ways and bad ways.
So the flexible approach, let's talk about that in a little bit more. How could a regional council implement a flexible approach? Yeah. Because the directive approach, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and it's easy to measure, have they done X, Y, and Z? Exactly. As soon as you've got a flexible approach and judgment calls are then made around my particular farm system, how is that actually, how do you introduce that in a regulatory way?
I think there's sort of two parts to that. The first is that it doesn't mean to say that there wouldn't be some rule. Of course, there's going to be rules. Like when we costed up the flexible approach for the setbacks, we were like, okay, we want all waterways to have at least 5 meters of setback. So that was like locked in and loaded for that farm under the flexible approach. So there was still some, I guess, cut-off points in terms of the rules. But then the risk assessment was to go, rather than increase it to 10 or 20 metres based on slope, which is what the blanket rule locked in. It was do the risk assessment to identify where sediment's an issue and where you might need a 10 or 20 metre buffer zone in certain areas, as opposed to a blanket rule. So, sorry, that doesn't answer your question entirely, but I think the point I'm trying to make there is that there's still going to be some rules
baseline
with a flexible approach. Like, it's not saying do what you like. How each council or region packages this will differ, but there's clearly going to be some pretty baseline rules that are required. And then how do you implement, really making sure that the risks are matched with the right mitigation? That's where the farm environment plans could potentially come in. That's where there needs to be really good industry engagements with farmers, front-footing this, because they know where the risks are on their farm when it comes to things like sediment, maybe not so much with fertiliser and nitrogen leaching. That's less visible, but there's certainly a lot of environmental, issues on a farm that farmers are the ones that know how to find and manage the solutions for their farm. But they need to be supported, and there probably would need to be some, regulatory auditing process to make sure that is happening. And what that looks like could vary from place to place. And it's not easy. I'm certainly not suggesting that it's an easy process, but I just really think that you've seen it as well as much as I have when you see farmers get together to look for solutions. They're amazing what they can achieve in a short space of time if they're engaged in that process. And I guess the concern is if the regulations lack the flexibility or disarms the potential for there to be flexibility there, then it's just not going to get those environmental outcomes. And so it's a delicate path to walk, I would say. But yeah.
So how is the council going to utilise this report? I mean, sort of like, I think, I mean, as you said, I mean, it's a big report. There's different sectors that have been looking at the impact on their particular sector. Our sector, is probably a particularly complex, diverse system. How are they going to be able to take all of that information and sort of collate it and assimilate it and come up with something that is going to be meaningful? Is there a process by which the information in this report is going to be fed into the council's decision making?
There is. So we're very the industry advisory group that I'm involved with is very engaged with the council. So they're trying to do many things at once. They get collecting this information through catchment studies and through farmer programs. They're doing this economic assessment work with the sectors to build this picture of characterising the different sectors, considering what then having the information to make the decisions at their disposal, looking at this economic impacts, whilst they're also thinking about, well, how are we going to meet these regulations, make sure that we get those targets in place and putting into place meaningful regulations that do make the policy statements and those national regulations uphold them. So it's not easy, and I think that's running around trying to do this all at once. So trying to get the information, make these decisions, and it's all happening at once, and then to notify a plan this year. So I'd say it's a very busy time for them, and just as positive that they're at least getting this information from farmers and from industry to factor in. However, how they do that, I do not know, but I just don't think it is easy, and I think it's something that's happening very, very quickly.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess, the worrying thing for me is the range in impact. Yes, it might be an 8% impact on profitability for some, and some farmers, can accommodate that. But if you're up at, a 20% reduction, that's suddenly becoming quite a serious impediment to the future profitability of your farm business. So, I mean, are they going to use that type of information? I mean, in some ways, have they got the ability to dial back some of the implementation of some of the regulations at the council level?
You're asking me questions that I would need a crystal ball to answer. I do not know about the phasing of the regulation and the plan. I think that's a really important point, though, like what businesses can carry this and what can't. And there might well be some that can't, because it really depends on how much debt they're carrying in the first place. And there's all sorts of other implications on valuing assets and market value that get affected by regulations as well, and how it's implemented over time in terms of the cost. Let's just hope it's a journey of continuous improvement where you're not expected to do everything at once, and you can take those steps, and the resilience of the system improves. Potentially, there's opportunity there for greater efficiencies to be more economically, robust as well. And thinking about some of sensible regulations to keep soil on the paddock and not lose the important resource is also important for productivity and yield and as well. So there's all sorts of things going on here.
And I mean, as you say, we can't necessarily influence, sort of the timing and the nature of what the council are going to implement. Although, having said that, being part of this work is certainly going to be able to inform them of potential consequences. But if we've got growers down there, what should they be doing now in order to make the transition to whatever it is implemented by the councils in the next 3 or 4 years, to make that transition as palatable as possible? Because it really is like, you cannot wait until the council implements the regulation, because it will just be too much in too short a time. So what can we be saying to our growers now?
No, that's right. It's I really strongly believe that getting out there and not waiting to being told what to do, getting out there and making that movement towards continuous improvement around good management practices, around assessing your risk, putting into place things that you know are right for your farm, not waiting to being told what to do, and then documenting that and making sure that you're telling that story and you're proud of it and you're a part of part of that process, without it being something that comes down to a rule and a plan and so on, waving a stick. I think that there's so many other reasons why front-footing it and looking for those solutions and doing that now is the right way to go.
And we do have a lot of the tools and technologies available, that from research that FAR and others have done. So it's not that there aren't things that could be done now, because we do have, those tools. I mean, we do have farm environment plan templates, and we have a whole range of tools and technologies to help growers manage, nitrogen use efficiency, water use efficiency, etc. So it's really about trying to be proactive and getting ahead of the regulatory game. And it's very difficult to, I suppose, convince growers how important it is to do that, because I guess the counterfactual is that they don't do it, and at some stage in the future we'll find out what the impact is, but that's not going to help them at that time. So, I mean, I guess it's working with the proactive farmers who are already proactively doing things and using them to illustrate to other growers the transition pathway.
Yeah, and the solutions are many and varied, and that's right, and finding the ones that work for you and doing them and taking action.
Do we know if the other regional councils are doing similar things to what Otago Regional Council has done? Every
regional council in New Zealand will be thinking about how they are going to be implementing the policy statements and what have you, and they'll all be doing it slightly differently. I'm not aware of any other council who have invested in this degree of engagement, but then ORC is I think the first region that will be notifying a plan incorporating all the new policies. So it might be something that will unfold in other regions in a similar way, and this could be a precedent. I really don't know.
So any lessons, that we've learned from being involved in this, we should be getting that out as widely as possible.
I think so. Yeah. I think so, yeah.
So take-home messages then for growers in Otago?
Don't be alarmed. Don't look at some of these hypothetical scenarios and think that these are the worst case things that the council will implement. These are just conversation starters, and get involved in the conversations, and that's going to lead to the best outcomes, I should say.
And if growers want to start, making some difference on their farm, then FAR's always there to point them in the right direction.
Exactly. There's support and resources available, and will continue to make them better and more accessible, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Abie. And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.